Today we're going to talk about some of the best ways to go about acquiring a Space Marine army if you're completely new to the faction. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. And in videos like today, we're all about getting the most models on the tabletop for the least amount of money. Now, Space Marines are the core 40k faction and receive more support than virtually any army in the game. They're fairly beginner friendly and they're pretty strong in the rules, at least at the moment. As we discussed in my recent video on choosing a 40k faction, they're a very good beginner army to get into the game of 40k with, and Games Workshop sells a lot of very good value options for getting into the faction of Space Marines that are both easy to use if you're completely new to the game or if you're a veteran player looking to try out a different faction. In this video, we'll talk about a few general principles that you want to think about when starting a new army of Space Marines, some of the individual things that you can be looking to purchase as your first buys to get you into the faction and build up a core of a force, some potential expansion options after that, and also what books I'd recommend getting in which order for collecting Space Marines. So without further ado, let's get into it. We're going to start off with some general principles on collecting 40k armies. Firstly, unless you're really experienced with the game and are well used to collecting entirely new armies, then I'd generally start small and take each purchase one step at a time. Don't just go and spend loads and loads of money on an entire 2000 point Space Marine army. You're not going to be able to make and paint it all in one go. You're going to give yourself absolutely tons of work from a hobbying point of view, and you really don't have anything to lose by saving some of those purchases till later. Buy a box, assemble the miniatures and get some paint on them, and while you're undertaking that process you can think about your next purchase, and only do that when it makes sense. There are various reasons why you might not continue with a project, including just being not inspired by the models or the gameplay, or other real-world life issues getting in the way, meaning that you just don't have enough time to complete the project. I'm not trying to dissuade anyone from getting into 40k, but there's absolutely nothing to lose by taking things one step at a time. Secondly, I'd start with some cheap core units and build up from there. Some of the tanks and new models are very interesting and cool, and by all means get things if you really like the look of the models or they're good fun, but I'd also highly recommend getting some cheap core choices and HQ choices that can be very easily obtained in the start collecting sets to give you an actual functional army on the tabletop for quite cheap and quite quickly. When you're approaching Space Marines, I generally recommend focusing on the Primaris range from Games Workshop, as these guys, for better or worse, are the future of the faction. For those who don't know, Primaris are the bigger souped up Space Marines that came out at the start of 8th edition, and the vast majority of Space Marine releases from Games Workshop are going to be Primaris from now on. At some point a long time in the future they may stop supporting the rest of the Space Marine range, so for new big projects I'd typically recommend starting with a core of Primaris, and then maybe getting certain units that you like from the older style Space Marines to supplement them, rather than making them the core of your army at this point. Again, I'm not saying absolutely not if you do like the older style Space Marines more, but if you like both the same, then generally going Primaris is probably the best tactical way to go. Next, you have to think about where you're actually getting the models from, or anywhere else with access to discount retailers who sell Games Workshop's products for 20% off or something, then there's no real reason not to use them. Incidentally, if you do live in the UK and are looking to buy any models at some point soon, I do have a link to Element Games, one of these discount retailers, down in the video description below. If you click that before ordering any Warhammer in, then a small portion of the profits goes to Auspex Tactics without costing you any more, so it can be a good way to support the channel if you are thinking about buying some Space Marines or something in the near future. Though obviously don't buy anything that you weren't already intending to. Anyway, back on track. This is a very easy way for new players to save some money on 40k, if you do have access to these stores or sites online, as they're basically just a flat discount on Games Workshop products, and there's no real disincentive. Other than them, you can also think about buying pre-owned. As Space Marines are such a popular faction, there's usually loads of pre-owned models on sale on eBay or in your local area on Facebook groups. If you don't mind repainting some models or potentially paint stripping them, then this will genuinely save you a ton of money. And as someone's already done the work of assembling and painting them, then you could play with them straight away. Though admittedly they might not have been exactly how you would have armed them, assembled them or painted them, so there are trade-offs. We're going to be talking about a few of the starter boxes for Space Marines, and if you live in an area where eBay is a big thing, such as the UK or US, you'll typically find people selling the individual units from these boxes online on eBay. It can be a very cheap way to, say, add another squad of Primaris Inceptors to your army, because they're available in No Fear and Dark Imperium, and if you just wanted those models in particular, you could acquire them for very cheap indeed. Finally, if you are looking to buy models that are effective in the game, this isn't necessarily a bad thing at all, but be aware that the rules can and do change this edition. Games Workshop has made some drastic changes to Space Marines over the last few months, the vast majority being massive boosts to the strength of the faction, but they have started dialing them back a little bit and have recently made a balanced change to their combat doctrines, which has significantly weakened some units in the faction. I wouldn't worry massively if you're not at the top end of the competitive game, but just basically be aware that the rules that your model is sold with might get slightly better and worse over time, depending on whether Games Workshop thinks that the unit's a bit weak and needs a strength boost, or is a bit strong and needs reining in a bit. This is definitely a bit more of a nudge towards playing the models that you actually just like the look of and feel good on the battlefield, as opposed to squeezing every single bit of optimization out of an army list. Okay, with all of those general principles talked about, let's talk about the best kits that I recommend actually buying. And for Space Marines, by far the most obvious are the Dark Imperium and No Fear box sets. These two are the core starting boxes of the game, particularly Dark Imperium, where you get quite a lot of Space Marine miniatures, for the price tag of £95 in the UK and $160 in the US. In addition to this, you also get the big rulebook for Warhammer 40k, which is very handy if you don't already have a copy, and you also get a bunch of Death Guard miniatures, which you could either keep yourself or sell either in your local area or on eBay, or you could potentially split the box with someone else who wants to start Death Guard, further decreasing the amount that you'll be spending on it. No Fear is a slightly slimmed down version of this, where you don't get the rulebook, as you don't get quite as many Space Marine miniatures. You'd lose 2 lieutenants, the very cool Primaris Ancient, and 1 squad of intercessors, but the box is also significantly cheaper at £50 in the UK and $80 in the US. Both of these are frankly very, very good deals for the amount of miniatures you get, even if you just took into account the Space Marines, never mind the books and the Death Guard that you get in both sets. Dark Imperium alone gives you somewhere between 700 and 800 points of Space Marines to field on the tabletop, so you really do get a full mini army straight from the box. I think Games Workshop has priced this one fairly aggressively to try and get new players in the game, and it's certainly something that's worth taking advantage of if you're trying to get into Space Marines, whether or not you're a new player. The same goes for No Fear. It gets you around about 500 points of Space Marines from the box, 3 big fairly effective Primaris units and the Gravis Captain. I'd highly recommend one of these as a good way to start a Space Marine army. You get a whole ton of points on the table, some good all-round core units that will perform pretty well in-game, and both of these kits get massive bonus points if you can find some way to offload the Death Guard, either through splitting the kit or selling them for more money. Now, the other major way that I'd recommend as a potential way to get into Space Marines is one of their new Start Collecting boxes, and interestingly enough, it isn't the standard Start Collecting Space Marine box that gets you a tactical squad and a dreadnought. It's the new Primaris Vanguard Start Collecting Space Marine box. This one has the Vanguard pattern Space Marines who are clad in Phobos armour, so the slightly more stealthy and sneaky guys that have a bit of a Spec Ops vibe going on. Now, like the Dark Imperium box sets, these are all monopose models, which is one of the reasons why they're so cheap. This Vanguard Space Marine box set will cost you $95 or £60 if you're in the UK. In it you get some suppressors, the jumpy guys with the autocannons, the eliminators, the sniper chaps, 10 Space Marine infiltrators, the scout version of Primaris Space Marines, and an HQ choice in a Primaris Lieutenant in Phobos armour. This one again works out to be around 400 to 500 points, so is another sizable chunk that you can add to your Marine army all in one go. I'd personally weigh this up against the Dark Imperium and No Fear box sets, and think about whether you prefer the look and feel of the more covert Vanguard Space Marines, or the more clean and slightly less busy look of the more standard Primaris. Much like the Dark Imperium and No Fear box sets, the Vanguard Start Collecting kit has a reasonably decent mix of units. You can make a couple of infiltrator squads from the 10-man squad. You have a bit of long-range anti-tank punch in those suppressors, and the eliminators are some of the best snipers in 40k at the moment, and aren't even too bad at hurting tanks themselves with those sniper rifles. But as I said, the rules can change. If you're trying to get an as big and effective Space Marine army on the go as quickly as possible, you could perhaps get No Fear, and then add this box in after, and you'd have yourself quite a well-rounded Space Marine Primaris force, with 2 HQ choices and 3 troops to make yourself a battalion, and a fair few interesting support units between suppressors, eliminators, inceptors and hellblasters. So you'd have a fair few different tactical options on the table, and from that core you could think about expanding out to other options. By this point you'll already have quite a lot of units on the table, and a decent well-rounded core to your army, so basically I'd be looking through the Space Marine Codex and have a think about which units most appeal to you, both in terms of aesthetics and their rules on the tabletop. would be to add some heavy armour to the Space Marine force. If we were focusing on Primaris, then some reasonable choices could be a Repulsor Executioner. It is quite an expensive tank from Games Workshop, but it does cost a fair bit of points in-game as well, so it doesn't have the worst ratio of money spent in reality to points available on the tabletop. It has an absolutely enormous anti-tank gun, which can really solve a lot of problems that your Primaris Marines might be struggling with if you're just using the options from these box sets. Other options could be to think about an Invicta Tactical Warsuit. These guys are very strong in-game at the moment and add some close combat muscle to your army. You could think about a Redemptor Dreadnought, which is a bit of an all-rounder, pretty tough and durable with a decent amount of firepower and pretty strong close combat. The Redemptor is quite a good value buy as well, because you can buy it as an easy build kit for just £25 in the UK, which is a lot cheaper than the big multi-part plastic kit would be if you wanted the different options of the guns. Another good unit to add in could be some Aggressors to get some really decent anti-infantry firepower and close combat muscle. And if you were to go that route, I'd typically recommend getting that through the Start Collecting Primaris Space Wolves box set. This set's £60 in the UK or $95 in the US, and gets you a squad of Aggressors and a squad of Intercessors, as well as a unique Space Wolves character. To be honest, it's already a discount over getting multi-part Intercessors and multi-part Aggressors separately. But you also get some Space Wolf upgrade frames, which you could either add as detail to your Marines, particularly if you are playing Space Wolves, or again you could resell them, and they do resell okay on the internet. And the Space Wolves character, you could either use him for your Space Wolves if you are playing Space Wolves, or potentially just make him into a regular HQ choice for your Primaris Marines and just field him as a Primaris Captain or Lieutenant. So in terms of miniatures, those are the steps I'd go for. Get one of either Dark Imperium, No Fear or Vanguard Space Marines, build them, paint them, use them in games a bit, then either get another one of those three, or start adding in potentially heavier hitting units such as Repulsors, Invictors, Redemptors or Aggressors, and slowly build up your collection from there. I will talk briefly about books as well. Yeah, of course, if you are getting into 40k from a standing start, then you're typically going to want the core rules. This certainly is a big plus in terms of getting the Dark Imperium box, as it contains a lot of helpful info on the background of the factions and various ways to play the game. From there, it depends a little bit on what Space Marine chapter you're thinking of playing. The vast majority of the Space Marines are contained in the Codex Space Marines rulebook, so if you're thinking about playing your own custom chapter, or Ultramarines, White Scars, Raven Guard, Iron Hands, Salamanders, Imperial Fists or Black Templars, I would get this book first. If you're thinking about playing either Blood Angels, Dark Angels or Space Wolves, then these guys all have their own unique codexes, so you would need that unique book for the faction, and you don't need to actually get the core Codex Space Marines rulebook. I think that that's really all you need to start playing the game. I'd certainly not recommend rushing out to get anything else beyond that until you've got a fairly sizable army on the go. Now if you are choosing one of the factions from Codex Space Marines, such as say Ultramarines or Raven Guard or something, then Games Workshop also sells supplement books which give them additional powerful rules for that sub-faction. These are only usable if you do have the core Codex Space Marines rulebook, and they're very much additional extra optional rules. It will certainly make your army stronger, but this is definitely a secondary purchase somewhere down the line rather than being the first thing that you buy. I have heard of people mistakenly buying the supplement book first and not understanding why there aren't any unit data sheets in it, so try not to fall into that trap. You can also get further Space Marine rules from Psychic Awakening books. There have been ones released for Space Marines themselves in Faith and Fury, as well as ones for those individual unique successors, Blood Angels in Blood of Baal, Dark Angels in Ritual of the Damned, and Space Wolves in the upcoming Saga of the Beast. Again, while these do technically update the core rules of the faction, I would buy these as a secondary thing, to expand and power up your armies later once you've already got a fairly good Space Marine army going on. You really don't need to buy them all at once. So I hope that's been of some help to people. If you have any questions or ideas that I haven't really covered, please let me know down in the comments. Hopefully myself or someone else will be able to answer your questions and make this slightly unintuitive process a little bit clearer. If you've enjoyed my content, I have regular 40k tactics videos coming out pretty much every single day, so if you'd like to see more, consider subscribing to Auspex Tactics. I did mention it earlier, but if you'd like to support the channel and you live in the UK, and you are thinking about buying any Warhammer in the near future, then think about giving that Element Games affiliate link down in the video description a click before you order from them. They offer a good discount, have never let me down in terms of posting an order to me, and if you order after having clicked that link, some of the money goes to support the channel without costing you any more at all. In any case, thank you very much for listening. I'll hope to see you guys in the next episode.